Are the FAANGs declining on the stock market? And what does that mean about your future? We talked to our financial expert, Hugh Anderson, about the future of these currently high-flying stocks.
Informed, not inflamed finance.
Hi, everyone. John Daly here with Informed, Not Inflamed. And we keep talking about big changes happening politically and economically that most people don't see coming. This podcast spells them out even more. We are going to talk about the FAANGs. That's FAANG. What do they stand for? Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. There is a report just out that we will tell you about, and we'll give you the website to go see it. It says that these high-flying stocks might be seeing their sunset soon. Now, here to give us more insight is Hugh Anderson. He is the guy we turn to for all things financial here. He is the managing director of Hightower Las Vegas, a comprehensive wealth management firm, which includes a proprietary in-house portfolio management. Full disclosure, Hugh has been guiding me for years, all the way back to my news anchoring days in Las Vegas, when he would do the daily stock wrap-up for me on newscasts. And Hugh, that will ring some memories for folks in Las Vegas.
Yes, John, they will. Very foggy, distant memories, but nonetheless, very fond ones.
Absolutely. And this is some good stuff looking forward, too. So this report comes from Aorus Investment Management. I'll put the website on the page here for the podcast. It is www.aorisim.au. Okay, Hugh, do you find this report credible?
Absolutely, John. The concept is that most investment decades, as it were, and they're not necessarily in perfect calendar decades, but nonetheless, we can refer to the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so forth. And in hindsight, you see themes. And if you think back to the 70s, there was this concept called the Nifty 50. And actually, it started in the late 60s, where you just hypothetically, the 50 most consistently best performing stocks like IBM or Coca-Cola, you just bought them, set them in a drawer, and forgot about them, and it'd make you incredibly rich like some perpetual motion machine. And despite the fact that these were extraordinarily high quality companies and that they were very good at what they did, they got incredibly overpriced, incredibly overowned, and anybody who didn't catch that ride at the beginning of the theme ended up being very, very unfortunately damaged financially. And so we're seeing that we're seeing that repeated in the 80s. The Asian, especially specifically the Japanese stocks, were all the rage, and in the 90s, of course, and actually the 80s also was the era of the oil stocks, and then in the 90s, of course, you had the internet stocks. And now in the last 10 years, you've got the FAANGs, and the FAANGs are basically several companies that have invented new economic models, Amazon being one of them. And we humans have this tendency toward anchoring, where the most recent history is what's deeply embedded in our brains, and we tend to extrapolate that most recent history. And those who think that the FAANG stocks are going to continue on the same trajectory that they've had in the last 10 years for the next 10 years are probably going to be very, very disappointed.
All right. So these stocks, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, the FAANGs, why, besides the history, why do you think specifically they are they're on their way down?
Well, the reason I circulated this particular report was not so much an indictment of these individual companies, although I think that the report does a good job of highlighting some of the issues. But one of the most fundamental issues that people have to recognize is the law of large numbers. It's very easy for a very small company to grow at very high rates of growth when they're small. But as that company continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger, it's very difficult for that company to continue to grow at those predecessor rates. And as these companies have gotten humongous, to say the least, they are beginning to slow down in their growth trajectories. And you will tend to see their prices not necessarily go up to the degree that they did. And what they have been major beneficiaries of in the most recent couple of years has been the inclusion of these stocks in major indices that are replicated in exchange traded funds, where people have been passively investing and not recognizing the fact that these handful of stocks represent substantial amounts of the fund that they're investing in. So they think they're diversifying dramatically when in fact they may not be.
Okay, so I know I can't put you on the spot as far as stock picking goes, but what should people be looking at instead?
Well, I hate to be conjuring up boring cliches, but like Wayne Gretzky always said, go where the puck is going, not where it is or where it has been. And so, the real important thing for investors to look at is where could the next great breakout opportunities present themselves. And if you're not good at crystal ball gazing like that, then the next best thing is just to avoid overhyped, overowned, overpriced securities. And so the what you want to look for are investments and investment themes that might be getting ignored or neglected.
Okay, what does this mean for our lives and how things might change if we see these FAANGs going down and other companies coming up? I mean, can you kind of extrapolate what we might be looking at?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that you can look at is look back through history and see where major trends and themes evolved under certain circumstances. And if you look back over the last 30 or 40 years, we've been in a major disinflationary environment for any number of reasons. But the issue there has been that commodities have gone down dramatically in value. And so oil and gas and copper and all these things that go into the real economy have become relatively cheap, as it were, compared to where they were in the high inflationary 70s. Well, if people are thinking outside the box and not extrapolating recent history, they might consider looking at a theme and saying, well, if something is ridiculously cheap to the point of almost being quote unquote free relative to its extraction costs and so forth, what would cause us to have an environment where commodities might start outperforming paper assets? Would it be a resurgence of inflation? Would it be any change in the economic environment that we've grown used to over the last several decades? So that is one thing. The other thing is, of course, people lump technology into one grandiose theme. And again, I'm pounding the word theme because that is what I'm really on guard against or looking for. And so the theme of these platform beneficiaries, aka Amazon and Google, and Facebook, who have created these platforms that have performed economic miracles in terms of their stock prices and what they've done to the economy, the real economy, both positively and negatively. People think that defines technology, when in fact there are multiple dozens, if not hundreds, of subsets of technology. And one area that people might want to consider looking at is medical technology, because just on the other theme of health and wellness and so forth, people are living longer and not necessarily healthier, but there are indications on the horizon that many chronic ailments that heretofore have been either deadly and or very debilitating may in fact not only be arrested but also cured. And think in terms of things like Alzheimer's or diabetes and the like. And a lot of that is being advanced through medical technology as compared to generic technology.
Interesting. Okay. We are talking with our financial guy, Hugh Anderson. He's the managing director at Hightower Las Vegas, a comprehensive wealth management firm, including a proprietary in-house portfolio management. You can reach him at HAnderson, and Anderson has an O, S-O-N at the end there, at Hightower Advisors, and there's an O also at the end of advisors, so it's ADVISORS. .com. And the site for this report that we're talking about is www.aorisim.com.au. Talk about what people should think about as far as retirement accounts. In other words, How will you and Hightower Advisors approach these changes in the FAANGs?
Well, the key fundamentals of our discipline, John, are first and foremost quality. We want to make sure that when we go through another severe economic cycle, not if, but when, we want to make sure that the securities that we own on behalf of clients are impervious to going out of business. They may fluctuate in value, they may decline in value for a time, but they're not at risk of going out of business. So we make sure that the financial integrity is sound. The good news about the FANG stocks is their financial integrity is sound across the board. The second critical component of our discipline is value and price. We will not overpay for anything. We don't care how impressive they are. And so there comes a point where a stock may have the better mousetrap and may be growing like a weed and may have impeccable financial credentials, but if the price exceeds its ability to provide positive rates of return over a reasonable time frame, then we just won't buy it. Now, we may keep it on our radar to accumulate it at a much lower price, but if that doesn't happen, then we look for greener pastures.
Okay. All right. Good. I know when you and I talk, we try to stay away from politics here, but talk about how our current state of politics, and for that matter, the world's state of politics, which has been brewing since, I would say, since the Great Recession. How is this going to play into this? And I'm talking about trade wars, nationalistic leaders, aging societies, these life-changing technologies that are sometimes taking away jobs and causing monopolies. Are they part of the cause of these changes, or are they kind of an impediment to people being able to ride the wave of change successfully? And I'm talking about, again, these FAANGs changing and then other companies coming in. Is there anything going on in our politics or what's happening today that we need to kind of be aware of that's actually causing some things?
Oh, absolutely. You've heard the phrase demographics is destiny, and you're absolutely right. The entire planet is graying. There are certain subsections of the planet, namely in Africa and parts of the Middle East, where the population is still growing. But even in China, John, the population is beginning to stagnate. And in fact, there are numerous countries in Europe, especially, that are declining in population. Population growth plus productivity are the only things that drive economic growth. So if we have declining population, we have just put a burden on the productivity component of growth to make up for the shortfall. And so as far as an impediment to people's retirement, we're living longer. We now have the challenge of a slower growing economic cycle, which implies slower growth in the companies that make up the economies around the world. And people are possibly whistling past the proverbial graveyard by saying, well, this time is different, and so it doesn't matter what we pay because we don't have an alternative. Well, for someone to suffer a 20, 30, 50% decline in their asset value late in their working career or early in their retirement, that could be an irrecoverable financial circumstance that would put them in a very serious bind long term, because, again, as I mentioned before, we are all living longer, thankfully, to better technology and pharmaceuticals. But the reality is that you need money to have a nice retirement, as it were, an enjoyable retirement, as compared to living a long time in destitution. So we are very concerned about the immediate future. And again, being gentle on the political conversation, there is a substantial lack of leadership globally. Everybody and their brother, and you and I have known each other for decades at this point, the same themes have been brought up time and time again about how to shore up Social Security, Medicare, how to make sure that we have adequate financial support for public pensions and the like. And everybody talks about it, but just like the weather, nobody does anything about it. Mm-hmm. And now we are getting to that point where the proverbial can being kicked down the road. Our political leadership is recognizing that the road that they've been kicking down the can down is actually an alley, and they now can see the wall at the end of the alley where the can's not going to go any further.
which makes these new technologies, these that can be great investments, so much more important then.
Oh, absolutely. And I just read a wonderful article probably a year ago about how everybody is now insistent that their children, nieces, and nephew, and anybody who's of an age where they can reposition themselves career-wise should be studying science and technology types of endeavors and programming and the like. And this article alluded to the fact, well, don't spend too much time learning how to program because the programs are already learning how to program themselves. So we won't need humans for that either. But there are plenty of places where there are jobs that are going wanting due to lack of skill sets. All the the robots that are going to become more and more prolific in the various aspects of manufacturing and so forth need to be programmed, need to be maintained, need to be serviced, need to be built. And so there's this whole concept of automation and technology replacing humans, yes, is a challenge, especially for those later in their lives where they don't have much career runway to completely reposition themselves. But there's plenty of opportunity for people who do have that ability to reposition, and especially for our young people. It's just a matter of looking through the windshield and not through the rearview mirror.
A good tie-in too, because the next question I wanted to ask you about was things that we've talked about here on this podcast is the advent of artificial intelligence and blockchain technology. Does that have anything to do with these FAANGs dropping? Is that, are we beginning to see? And again, I'm reading a lot of stuff that says we are getting into the artificial intelligence and the blockchain technology. Is that what could be undermining the FAANGs as well? And is that something you see going forward?
I don't know if that particular theme is undermining them. Those major companies are actually big users of artificial intelligence, but I think the impact of I think you're on the right trail with artificial intelligence. I don't think the real economy and the financial markets truly know how we're going to be impacted by artificial intelligence. On any given day, John, depends upon which statistic you read, 70 to 80% of stock market volume is driven by artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. It's not driven by the likes of you and me deciding to buy or sell. It's Absolutely. Not driven by the likes of, Warren Buffett's, one of his companies buying or selling. It's computers that have been pre-programmed to respond to any number of variables. Interest rates went up today, buy, and interest rates went down today, sell. And so a lot of that is pre-programmed. That's the bad news because people are getting very complacent about their investment diligence. The good news, though, is that we as mere mortals can actually exploit that because those computers will kick in stupidly periodically to something that you and I, as thinking entities, will say, well, that makes no sense. That shouldn't have dropped 25% overnight for no good reason. I'll buy it, whereas the computers keep selling it.
Interesting. All right. We are talking with our financial guy, Hugh Anderson, the managing director at Hightower Las Vegas, a comprehensive wealth management firm, including proprietary in-house portfolio management that they have. You can reach him at HAnderson, that's O-N at the end, at Hightower Advisors. That's with an O at the end of advisors as well. And the site for this report that we're talking about is www.aorisim.com.au. Hugh, talk about the attitude people should have looking at all this. The drop of the FAANGs, new technologies that are going to come up, new stocks that are going to, be a whole different future. Is this a gloomy future, or is it something we should embrace?
Oh, we should embrace it, John. First of all, there's no point in not embracing it because it's coming whether we want it or not. More importantly, it's just part of the big cycles that humankind has gone through since the dawn of time. And I always tell, when I have an opportunity to address classrooms, I always talk to them about the day of the horseless carriage, and in the normal village, there might be multiple blacksmiths who were used to shoeing horses and fixing the rigging of all the things that go on plow horses and the like. And the first horseless carriage that went by, 90% of those blacksmiths said, that's just a fad, or that's just a contraption. That's never going to take hold. But one of those blacksmiths realized that's the future, and I'm going to learn how to bang fenders and fix motors. And lo and behold, when the tide turned, most of those blacksmiths were out of business, looking for something to do, and the other blacksmith was making hay while the sun was shining. And I think all of us need to step back. We are living in an environment that you're more of an expert than I am, John, where the flood of information is exorbitant, and we are just getting inundated and overwhelmed, and that can be the scary part. But if we can step back and learn to be discerning with where we get our information, get as much information from as many sources as possible, and again, step back and digest that in the bigger picture scheme of things rather than how is this going to affect me next Tuesday, then people can get a much better arm around how to not only embrace the unknown future, but also to be prepared for it.
So, and that's a great advice too. So give me a little informed, not inflamed reading or researching tips, because what I tell people is that there is so much information out of there, and you got to find a way to hone it down to the good stuff. In other words, where you're going to see both sides, or you got an opinion that it's at least considering the other side, even though taking its own side, and honoring that. Do you have, can you give any reading or researching tips that folks maybe will need to stay ahead of all this?
Well, I think some of the concepts that we talked about today, first of all, I tried to absorb far and wide as many disparate sources as possible on any particular theme. So, for instance, a major driving theme on where we're going is demographics. And just today, the Wall Street Journal had an article, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal, had an article on the demographics of pensions, where everybody knows that the pension system in the world, not just the United States, is grossly underfunded. And now, because interest rates are so low, the ability to fund them properly is impossible at these low levels of interest rates. So now that is a particular, and forgive me, it's probably not the Wall Street Journal, it was some other website I was perusing this morning. But if you Google demographics and pensions or any number of things, you will get a laundry list from very reputable sources, academic sources as well as popular sources and everything else. And if it's a theme that you have a concern about or have an interest in, that's a way to get smart about that particular theme. And then just try to find credible sources, and more importantly, as you get these sources, step back. It is some of the most important themes that we can take advantage of and or protect ourselves against are not happening today or tomorrow. They're happening over the next many months, many years, and many decades. And even though some of us only have so many more decades to go, the reality is that we can prepare ourselves for the inevitable as these undercurrents that most people don't pay attention to are building their impression on the economy and the financial markets.
All right. There you have it. We've been talking to our financial guy, Hugh Anderson, the managing director at Hightower Las Vegas, a comprehensive wealth management firm, which includes a proprietary in-house portfolio management. And again, I use them. Hugh is my guy. You can reach him at HAnderson. That's Anderson with an O, so it's SON, at Hightower Advisors, and Advisors has SORS at the end, hightoweradvisors.com. And the site of that report that we've been talking about is www.aorisim.com.au. And again, I'll put that on the different sites or wherever you're listening to this. Hugh, again, thanks for the insight. We're gonna talk a lot more. I really appreciate you doing some Informed, Not Inflamed.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for the opportunity.
And folks, thanks for listening in. Please follow my Facebook and Twitter news sites, either at John Daily News or Informed, Not Inflamed. Remember to stay informed, not inflamed. We'll talk to you next time.
For more on John Daly, go to informednotinflamed.com.